Well, today I'm going to share a sermon with you that I will tell you is not original for today. It is one that I have given before. Uh, Somebody asked me earlier, said, "Are we on to reruns?" I'm like, "No, I promise you we're not." But this is a sermon that I gave actually originally like in 2010, and then once again about 2015. So it's been a while. I don't think that I've ever done it here in the last few years. And so it's just one of my favorite things to talk about, and that is contentment, of being content, of being okay with everything that's going on in your life and that what you have and what's going on. And today, as we are in this season of Thanksgiving, while it's great to be thankful, often it's easy to be thankful when you have everything you want and you're getting everything you want. It's another thing to be content, even when things are not going the way that you want them to. And so today I want to share with you my sermon that I share with you today because I think that it's as important today as it ever has been, and it's that everything is just dirt. And I'll explain that as we get to it. But let's start by taking a look at a name that you may be familiar with. Some of you maybe not. John D. Rockefeller. If you know who John D. Rockefeller, he was the owner of Standard Oil in the turn of the 20th century. He was extremely wealthy. I mean, like extremely wealthy. He was at the height of his wealth in life. They estimate somewhere around $1.4 billion, which for that time would be the equivalent of about $435 billion today. If you've ever go to New York City, you can go and see the Standard Oil building. It's an amazing architectural masterpiece. It's actually not owned by them anymore. It's a conglomerate of different other businesses, and there's an art school in there and everything like that. But it's still an amazing, amazing building. But he was worth about $1.4 billion. And somebody interviewed him and asked him, how much money does it take to make a man happy? And his response, $1 more. If he just had $1 more, he would be happy. And maybe that's where you're at in life. And maybe sometimes I catch myself in that same thing. And maybe it's not just money. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's some possession, some level of notoriety. If I just had one more, then I would be okay. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Luke chapter 12. Jesus has a message to us concerning these things. In Luke chapter 12, it's a reflection of Matthew chapter 6. Many may be familiar for that passage, but here Jesus is laying out to his disciples and to us this idea that God is the provider of all things and is the one who will care for us. We should be content in what we have. So Luke chapter 12, verse 22 says, Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life and what you will eat, or about your body and what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap, but they have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. How much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the flowers grow, and they do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed as one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow thrown into the fire, how much more he will clothe you, you of little faith. And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give them to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, your heart is as well. Now, there's much we can take from this passage, but a couple of things that I see, first of all, is that we are to be thankful for what you have and not continue to covet for more. Be thankful for what you have. Quit worrying about what you don't have or that you could get more. It's interesting, he uses the analogy of ravens, and if you know anything about ravens in the scriptures, ravens often are depicting sinners, non-believers. In essence, God is saying is if he will take care of even non-believers, he takes care of everyone, how much more you who are part of his family, would he not care for you? Jesus uses an example of Solomon. Now, many of us are familiar with Solomon from the Old Testament. He was David's son, famously known for being wise. He was the king that built the temple. And he was extremely wealthy. He was known to have great wealth. In 1 Kings chapter 10, it says the weight of gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents. It's about equivalent to 19,980 kilograms of gold. In today's market, that would be about $1.9 billion. Now, when Jesus says that if you think that Solomon had wealth, if you think that Solomon was dressed in fine clothes, if you had $1.9 billion, you probably could afford some nice clothes, yes? And Jesus is saying is that even in Solomon, all of his grandeur, all of his glory, nothing compared to flowers, nothing compared to what we see in nature. And he says, if you think that you're going to be happy because of things that you can buy and obtain and get, that are worth even less than the things that you throw away, which is what he's saying with comparing it to the grass and flowers. There's nothing about this that's going to give you satisfaction. Solomon, in all of his grandeur and glory, in the book of Ecclesiastes, he goes on this journey to try to figure out what that would bring him satisfaction. And he says he denied himself nothing. Now, if you had resources of $1 billion, what kind of things could you probably try out? I would venture to say just about everything, yes? There's no adventure, there's no object, there's no thing that he could not have wished for that he would not have obtained. And yet he said none of that brought any satisfaction. Be thankful for what you have. Quit trying to get more. Because even when you have it all, or have resources to get it all, it's still insufficient. So some people say, well, I don't want wealth per se, but how about power and authority? That's really what would make me happy, would satisfy me. Or how about fame? So let's take a look at a couple of historical figures. Some of them you may be familiar with. How about Alexander the Great? He lived in 355 to 323 BC. By the age of 30, he controlled a total of 2.1 million square miles of land, reaching from Greece and northern Africa all the way across Persia, which is modern-day Iraq and Iran, all the way into India. He conquered what was the big chunk of the known world at the time. Yet he is not here. I mean, we remember him, right? He's Alexander the Great. I guess he's different than all the other Alexanders. But his kingdom is gone. In fact, he died at a young age, and shortly after that, his generals split the kingdom up. It didn't even last a generation. After the Greeks, the Romans came, the greatest of which may be Caesar. Julius Caesar was a great leader. At the height of his empire, he controlled 2.5 million square miles across most of Europe, northern Africa, and modern-day Middle East. He controlled 36% of the world's population. 1 out of 3 people in the world lived under the rule of Julius Caesar. Now, I know today that we have people who we look at and say, oh, they control this and they control that. 1 out of 3 people lived under the whims of a single man. Now, most of us who had Western Civ, we know about these guys, right? Julius Caesar, and we know about Alexander the Great, but some of us may be a little bit less familiar with the third guy I'd like to talk about, which is Genghis Khan. Now, if you've never studied Genghis Khan, great rabbit hole to go down. Fascinating fella. Took a bunch of tribes and nomads and made them an empire and a kingdom. At the height of the Mongolian Empire, Genghis Khan, which was between 1162 to 1227 AD, he controlled 12.7 million square miles. So the Roman Empire, 2.5, height of the Greek Empire, 2.1. He controlled 12.7 million square miles, ranging all the way from China, across India, Middle East, and all the way into Europe. He controlled 26% of the world's population. Now, I will say this about Genghis Khan, is he has a little bit of a legacy. If you know anything about him, he was a little prolific in his fatherhood. And it's estimated that still to this day that there's approximately 16 million descendants from him. That means nearly 1% of all males in the world today are a descendant of Genghis Khan. So he has a little bit of a legacy. But he doesn't have an empire. I mean, when was the last time that you brought up Genghis Khan in a conversation? I don't know, Thursday when you guys had family get together? The Roman Empire, maybe. Like that was a whole, remember that like trend about a year ago, 2 years ago with the guys that men just sit around and think about the Roman Empire? Some of us do. But very few people ever talk about the details of their lives. No one hardly ever remembers exactly what it is that they contributed. These are just 3 men. We could go on and on. There are people in the last century that we could bring up. We were recently having a conversation in our house about the sequence of the Soviet Union leaders. Of it was, you starting with Stalin and Gorbachev, and you had all these different leaders, and we're like, who were these people? In America, we have presidents. If I ask you who the 26th president is, does anybody know? I'm not going to tell you. You can look it up and find out what he did. But here's the thing, whoever it is, they're not president. They're not here. Now, they may have something of a legacy still. Matter of fact, 26 does. But if you have the most famous person, the most powerful person in life that's ever existed, they die. Their empires fade. Nothing lasts forever that's human. And so when we talk about contentment, when we see what Jesus is telling his disciples, he's like, you're going to worry about the stuff of life. Quit worrying about it. Instead, you're supposed to worry about things that really matter. And one of the reasons that I say, and thus the term that I use for this sermon, is just dirt. Because really, in essence, all things are just that. What do I mean by that? Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 8 through 10 says this: all things are wearisome, more than one can say. Now, this is Solomon, right? We already talked about how that he lived in excess. He had wealth. He had resources. He also had nearly 1,000 wives. So imagine his Black Friday shopping. His Amazon bill must be like, whew. He had excess in all things. All right? Like, that's something we need to understand. That's who's writing this to say that the eye never has enough seeing, nor the ear its hearing. He denied himself nothing. And what Solomon says is that what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything which we can say, look, this is something new? Now, I already hear a lot of this, and I think about, well, there's a lot of things new, right? He wrote that over 3,000 years ago. A few things have been invented since then, yes? One of my favorite books, an interesting book that I have, is a book that was written by a man who examined that in the late 1800s, the U.S. Patent, the person who was in charge of the U.S. Patent, closed the office of the U.S. Patent and said, surely nothing more can be made. And he let off a bunch of his staff and was like trying to phase out the department of the U.S. Patent. Now, I don't know if you noticed, there's been a few things that's been invented since the late 1800s. And it's a book that explains all of these things that people didn't think would have come into existence or didn't have any value or purpose, and now we today just can't live without them. Case in point, how many of you have a laptop or computer at home? There was a time when there was a guy who came to the leadership at IBM and said, hey, why don't we take computers, which if you don't know the history of computers, the first computers would fill this room and still had less computing power than your cell phone. They said, what if we took this and made it desktop so that people could use these at home? And IBM guys were like, that's not going to work. Of course, we know the rest of history. It does work, and people love laptops at home. People use computers all the time. So here's the thing. We know that even if you want anything, and they say nothing is invented, you're like, but Jason, things are invented, right? So you look at a cell phone. Obviously, Solomon did not have a cell phone. Are we all pretty much on agreement in that? If he could have, he would have. You got $1 billion. I'm surprised he didn't create something like that. Because in essence, a cell phone is only made up of things that existed then. Nothing new has been created. What goes into making a cell phone? Glass, plastic, some metal. And where do those things come from? Plastic comes from petroleum. Where does petroleum come from? The ground. Where do metals come from? The ground. Boy, there's a theme here. Where does glass come from? Where does electricity? No. The ground. Yeah. So silicone is used to make glass, your ore that's made to use metals. We go on and on. Plastics from petroleum. Petroleum is drawn out of the ground because plant life, organic life died and got pushed into the ground and compressed and made into petroleum. And somebody was smart enough to go, I can take this black goo out, separate it, make different things out of it. There's nothing that we have today that's made out of anything that couldn't have been made 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. When I say Solomon could have made a cell phone, that's quite literally true. They had sand, they had ore. They didn't quite understand processing of petroleum, but some people did use it for, they could set it on fire. They realized pitch and tar, they could use that. There's nothing new under the sun. So in essence, everything that you have is just dirt. So this Christmas, we're going to take dirt that's been packaged and wrap it in some very pretty paper and exchange it with one another. We'll say, here, have some dirt. And you paid for it by taking dirt down there, right? Now, I know it's a little different today because everything is like electronic, but in the old days, you would take this stuff called paper money down to a place and buy stuff. Do you all remember paper money? Okay. And what is paper made out of? Trees. Where do trees come from? Dirt. So you just basically take dirt down and exchange it for other dirt and then come home, and then you bring it home to people, and guess what people are made out of? Dirt. Some of y'all more than others. It's like if you look at the periodic table, right? There's about 118 common elements on the periodic table. They haven't changed. Now there's a few that gets added to it. Like we were recently at a college for summer camp, and the room that we happened to be in was the science room because they have a periodic table, and we were all looking. I'm like, they're up to like 158, but like the ones at the end are like made up names and stuff that like, well, I guess they're all made up names, but they have like Jasononium, like because some guy named Jason like took a thing and put it together for like a 1/1,000,000th of a second, and they go, we made an element. You're like, did you? You basically just took other things that you already had and put them together. That's called a recipe. That's not inventing something. There is nothing new under the sun. Now, Solomon didn't have a periodic chart, but the things that he could have had access to, we have access to this day. And then we look at our human body. The human body is predominantly made of water. What is water made of? I thought somebody was going to say dirt. I was going to be like, oh, okay. Yeah, oxygen and hydrogen, right? H2O. Yeah, like the one chemical formula that everybody remembers. It's made up of water and carbon and nitrogen and calcium and various other things. Just look on the side of your everyday vitamins, and you'll see all of these things like zinc and mercury and all these different things listed. Why did they put those in those little vitamins? Because your body's made of those. And then you go back to the periodic table, and you see those are the things. And where did those things come from? Dirt. So in essence, you and I are big piles of dirt. Yes? Which doesn't come as too much of a surprise because Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 says that the Lord formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into it the nostrils of life, and man became a living being. In other words, God took dirt and made us. Ecclesiastes, again, Solomon, he says, the dust returns to the ground that it came from, and the spirit returns to God from whom it arrived. God gave us the brilliant, beautiful, life-giving breath of life, but he used dirt to form us. That's why when we die and we get placed back in the ground, we get reabsorbed because we are of dirt. So I don't care if it's the most fanciest, specialist thing that's ever been created in the universe. It comes from dirt. And left alone, will return to it. Human beings, we, as amazing as we are, and our bodies are amazing. The functionality of all the things that are going on right now in your body, just sitting there, is more than what computers and robotics can ever duplicate. But in a split second, God could remove your spirit, and this thing that we use walking around will go into the dirt and disappear again. So if wealth is not going to make us content, 'cause Solomon wasn't content, if power and authority doesn't provide anything eternal, because three men, and I could list others, three of the greatest men that ever lived, their empires are gone. Their influence is over. They've returned to the dirt because all of us are dirt. And the newest, shiniest thing, and I have my Christmas list. I've handed it out. I love getting things. We all are going to do that here in a couple of weeks and exchange gifts, and there's nothing wrong with that. But understand that that gift that you receive is just dirt. So if we can't get anything to give us contentment from this world, then we must look to the eternal. And that's why Jesus says in Luke chapter 12, verse 33, you should provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not fail, where no thief comes and no moth destroys. The only contentment that we'll ever find is not in this physical world, but in the spiritual. The only thing that we will ever have eternal value and worth is things that are eternal. So if we're investing our time and our efforts in things of this world, they will fall away. They will come to an end. But Jesus says if you invest in the things of heaven, they are eternal. And so this Thanksgiving and heading into the holidays of Christmas and all of the celebrating and the gift exchanges and all the things that we do to show love to one another, just remember, it's not the things that matter. It's the eternal. It's giving people hope and love. It's sharing the salvation of Jesus with somebody. That's the most important. And that will last forever. Because it's not just dirt. If you know anything in your own life that you're struggling with right now, that you're thinking that you're just becoming too obsessed about, things of this world, I hope that this gives you a perspective that you'll go home and look at it. You'll go to see that thing that you just wish that you had and just realize it's just dirt. If you're like me, you're getting a little bit older and things are starting to not work so well, and you start to complain, good news, it's just dirt. He'll give us a new one day. Nothing that we have is going to last forever, except our relationship with Him. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, just